Hi, it's Mr. Johnson, and we are here with our lesson video on the elements of art. If you are one of my students, please make sure that you have your sketchbooks and a writing utensil, because we have some notes to take as we go along through this presentation. So, if you're with me, let's start. All right, I have a video that I want to show you is absolutely fantastic, and it's going to bring up all of the elements of art on the screen, and then it will include their definition underneath. So please make sure you write down each element of art and the definition that appears on the screen along with it. If you have to pause the video so that you can write that down, that's totally fine. Also, enjoy the really cool animations that go along with them. I just think they're fun. So let's watch the elements of art. Nicely done. Line is our first element. And shape. Now, these definitions will appear later on in my presentation, so if you don't get them now, that's okay. Then we have form. And space. Next, value. And color. And finally, texture. So those are the elements of art. Now, what are elements of art? So the elements of art are the tools that artists use when creating any work of art. So if you think about it in terms of other subjects, right, in English or language arts, those elements might be things like nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs, sentences, punctuation. Those are the elements of the language arts. In mathematics, it would be things like numbers, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Those are the elements of mathematics. It's about how you use those things together. So in art, these elements are what allow artists to create their artworks by making decisions about how they use and arrange them. So we're going to go through all of the elements just up next, and give you some examples of how they're used and ways that you can use them. And some things I want you to think about as we go along are some of the words in this word bank that are used to describe the different elements. So for things like lines, we know that lines can be straight, curved, dashed, dotted, broken, short, long, parallel, bold, wavy, diagonal, zigzag, right? Colors, there's a lot of color vocabulary here, primary, secondary. If you know what those mean, that's great. Colors can also be cool or warm or harsh or subtle or soft. Shape and form, shapes can be geometric and organic. Things like circles and squares, rectangles and triangles. Value can be light, medium, or dark, faded. It can be highlights and shadows. Textures can be smooth or rough, shiny, glossy, furry, fluffy, bumpy, grainy, prickly, sandy, right? All sorts of words that describe texture. Space, positive, negative, the background, the foreground, distant, close, far. So all of these terms are words that we're going to use as we describe the elements of art. So the first one is line. That's the path of a moving point. And here are some examples of different types of lines, right? They can be horizontal or vertical, diagonal, broken, zigzag, wavy, curved, spiral, and an endless other arrangement of ways that artists can use a line. So we're all familiar with what a line is, but what are some ways that artists use them in their artworks? I'm so glad you asked. This is an example of a painting by American artist Andy Warhol called Green Coca-Cola Bottles. And I want to point out his use of line in this painting. Now, in each of the Coca-Cola bottles, they're made up by a whole bunch of different lines. So there's some light green color behind them, but then you can see that the lines are used to create the edges of the bottles, as well as the logo on the bottles and these highlights and reflective marks on the bottles. But not only does he use line that way to depict the bottle, but he's also lined up the bottle. So you create these horizontal lines that go straight across the whole painting because of the way that he's placed those objects. So I love his use of line in this painting. Now, if you look at the individual bottles, some of the lines are thicker. Some, here where there's less ink, those lines are thinner or more faded or bolder in some areas. So varying your line can create a lot of visual interest. So the next element of art is shape, and that's the contour of a flat object. Now, contour means the edge. So there are lots of different types of shapes. The two biggest ones are organic shapes and geometric shapes, and there's a modified geometric shape also. So organic shapes are things that are free form or might appear in nature, while geometric shapes are generally angular or they're shapes with specific names, like a rectangle, a triangle, a circle, square, things like that. So in this painting by Pablo Picasso, it's called The Three Musicians, Picasso creates the entire design using shapes. So you can see both geometric shapes. There's like a half circle shape to make this man's hat. These eyes are ovals. His arms are rectangles. The bottom of this clarinet is a circle. This man's clothing are made up of triangles. And there are also more organic shapes, like the shape of his beard here is this funky organic shape. Even the wavy edges of the pants here are a much more organic shape. So I think shape is used in a really interesting way here to define all of the elements of this artwork. But using only shapes does make the artwork look kind of flat. So how do you use shape and make something look three-dimensional? So glad you asked. That way, you would use form. A form is a 3D object having depth. So depth, right, is a dimension that recedes in space this way. So shapes have length and width, or height and width, but forms also have depth. In this image, we have some very geometric forms. There's a cone and a cylinder, a sphere, and a box. But everything that's 3D has form. So in this example, this is an ancient Greek sculpture from the Cycladic period known as the harp player. And this is a person sitting on a chair playing a harp. Now their forearms and hands have broken off, unfortunately. But you can see that it's all made of basically geometric forms. So its head is kind of an egg shape. Its nose is a triangular form. Its neck is, and arms and legs are just these big cylinders. So this is a very geometric form that is, when put all together, creates the image of the Cycladic harp player. Now, forms can be really 3D, like a sculpture or a statue, or you can give the illusion of form by shading a subject to make it appear to be 3D. So the next element is space. This is an object's internal and external areas. So in these two drawings of these two hands, there's both the space that the hand occupies, which here is the white area on the left and the shaded area on the right. And there's also the background space or the negative space, and that's the extra area, right? It's external area, which is shaded on the left, and that's left white on the right. So space is a really cool element because we not only have space that objects take up, but you can also create the illusion of space in an artwork, which means making it look like things are closer to you or farther away from you. So in this painting by Giorgio de Chirico called Melancholy and Mystery of a Street, he has created the illusion of space. And so there's this girl playing with this hoop in the bottom left corner, and this building here, the white building, that recedes into space. Now this image is not really 3D, right? It's flat. So the illusion of space is created by making the building appear smaller, but he shrinks it as it moves farther away from us, as it moves across the page. And then this darker shadowed building on the right appears much closer to us because it's much larger. So by changing something's size, you can create the illusion of space. Now, value is an object's brightness or darkness. So value we often think of as what things cost or what something is worth. In art, the value is how bright or dark something is. So the example on this screen are the values of different colors. So on the left side, they're much lighter, brighter values. And on the right side, these oranges and reds fade to much darker, like deeper values. So let's look at this painting by one of my favorite current artists, a woman named Janet Fish. She lives in New York. This is called Glass and Plastic, and these reflective objects show a wide range of values. Most of them, if you notice, are almost grayscale. There's little bits of blue and green, some amber, ochre colors in the background, but everything else is almost whites, grays, blacks, really deep blues. And what that does is that whole range of values creates visual interest. You have bright white areas that act as highlights, dark areas that act as shadows, and then all these shades of gray in between. There's light gray here, there's a medium gray here, there's darker gray right over there. So in just this one image, she uses an entire range of values. Now, color is an object's chromatic quality. Now, there are a lot of aspects of color. We're going to touch on them here. We'll talk about them a little bit more when we get to the color unit. So colors, we know red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple, red are colors. There are lots of colors in between those, and we'll talk about the way artists use color as we go along throughout the year. This is a painting called Cafe Terrace at Night by Vincent van Gogh, and it uses color in a really cool way. He uses complementary colors. So complementary colors are colors that are opposite on the color wheel. So red, right, is opposite green if you make a line straight across. So red and green are complementary colors. Purple, if you make a line straight across, is complementary to yellow. And blue and orange are complementary colors. So here he uses mostly this yellow, orange, and this deep blue as complementary colors in this painting. Complementary colors, when used together, make both colors appear brighter. They pop when you use complementary colors near each other. So this deep blue and this yellow-orange really jumps off of the page because they are complementary colors. And his paintings are full of bright colors. There are blues, greens, oranges, yellows, whites. There are all sorts of things that he includes in his paintings. I think the colors are just beautiful here. And texture is the tactile quality of a surface. Now that means what a surface feels like, right? Tactile is the sense of touch. So what does a surface feel like? That's its texture. Now texture can be actual or implied. So the actual texture is really picking something up. This tissue really is soft because I can actually touch it. But the textures in the video on the screen are implied. If you touched your screen, it is flat, even though you've got rope textures and flower textures and bumpy textures. So this is a great example of a painting called Fabs by Wayne Thiebaud, where he uses implied texture. So the image is a flat painting, but it looks as though it has, right, this kind of smooth ice pop, this wood grain texture of the popsicle stick, and then all of the sprinkle textures on top. What I really think is cool about this is that it is not real. the sprinkles are just really well painted, but it creates the illusion of texture. It makes me want to try and touch, right, the artwork, which museums frown upon that, so don't do that. But I want to because it has such a tactile quality. So I think that's really cool. So there's a review sheet like this that is downloadable off of my virtual classroom. So if you want some easy examples and a description of each of the elements of art, there is this resource that you can download. We are going to have a quiz on these elements of art at the end of the unit in a couple of weeks. So make sure that you do have all of the information written down from their definitions. I will ask you to define the different elements of art and then pick out artworks that use certain elements. So to practice doing that, here's what I'd like you to do in your sketchbook. Take a look at these two artworks. The first one on the left is called Teddy Bear by artist Brent Estabrook. And the one on the right is a drawing called Reptiles by M.C. Escher. Now, think about two questions about both of these artworks. Which elements of art do you think are the most prominent in each of the artworks? And how would you describe their use of those elements? So you can just make a list if you want, but make a list for Teddy Bear by Brent Estabrook, and Reptiles by M.C. Escher. And although they use almost all of the elements, some of them I think are the most evident or most prominent, most important to each artwork. So if one of them uses line, right, so tell me, okay, this one uses line, this is how I think they've used it. You can go back to those descriptive words about each of the elements to find some ideas, ways you can talk about the line, the color, the shape, the form, the texture, or the value. So write this down in your sketchbook. Again, it can just be lists for each of the two artworks, and make sure that you take a photo of that along with your vocabulary and upload it to your Google slide for our class. All right, if you need any help, please let me know, and enjoy.